The tattered piece of paper nailed to the mercantile board read, "Wanted, wife to milk cows and keep house. No nonsense. Inquire at McAllister Place." Silas McAllister was a gaunt, hollow-eyed widower who had buried his young wife and infant son beneath the cottonwood tree 2 years prior. His once thriving cattle herd had dwindled to 3 bony heifers, and his barn roof sagged like a broken promise under the relentless Texas sun. He expected a desperate spinster to answer his blunt advertisement, someone who would simply haul water and leave his grief undisturbed forever. Instead, a wagon rolled in one morning carrying a woman with fiery auburn hair and a carpetbag that held far more than simple work dresses. Her name was Emma Thornton, and she stepped down with the confident stride of someone who had survived far worse than a crumbling ranch. She didn't curtsy or simper. She looked him straight in the eyes and demanded to see the cows before accepting a single drop of well water. He led her to the dusty corral, and she ran her practiced hands over the bony hips of the heifers, clicking her tongue with sharp disapproval. "These animals have milk fever and poor feed," she declared, and Silas felt a jolt of shame at her honest assessment of his neglect. Without waiting for his permission, she ordered him to fetch warm water and linseed oil, and she set to work massaging the cow's swollen udders. He watched, astonished, as her steady, gentle hand soothed the suffering beasts and soon coaxed a thin stream of salvageable milk into the pail. That evening, she scrubbed the soot-caked kitchen until the oil lamp cast a golden glow on clean surfaces that hadn't been seen in years. Silas ate a simple supper of cornbread she'd baked in a miraculously revived oven, and for the first time, his cabin smelled of life instead of decay. He asked her gruffly why a woman with her skills would answer a hopeless ad, and she replied that she needed a fresh start far from a ruined reputation. Her father had gambled away their prosperous dairy farm back in Ohio, leaving her with nothing but the knowledge of how to run a successful operation. The next morning, she rose before dawn, hitched the old plow horse, and began turning the overgrown kitchen garden that lay dormant behind the cabin. She planted beans, squash, and healing herbs, lecturing him that a homestead cannot survive on beef alone, and that soil was a sacred trust. Within a week, she traded her fine woolen shawl for a milking goat, and the sorry cow pen started to look like a real working dairy. She taught Silas to make soft cheese with rennet, and together they pressed curds in a wooden mold she'd carved from a fallen oak limb. When she carried the first wheel of cheese to the trading post, the proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, tasted it and immediately offered a standing order for her store. Silas began to mend the broken fences with a vigor he hadn't felt in years, driven by the strange desire to make Emma proud of his efforts. She never mentioned the word marriage again, and he never demanded it, but they fell into a rhythm of shared labor that felt holier than any church ceremony. One evening, a violent thunderstorm flooded the creek, and Emma dashed out to drag the terrified goats to higher ground without a moment's hesitation. He found her soaked and shivering, but grinning, clutching a newborn kid she'd saved, and something inside his chest cracked open with fierce admiration. He wrapped her in his own coat and blurted that she was the most extraordinary woman to ever set foot on his worthless dirt. She laughed, brushing mud from her cheek, and told him that every piece of land had a heartbeat if a person cared enough to listen. Under her guidance, the vegetable garden exploded into a lush patch that supplied the whole town with fresh produce through a subscription arrangement. She started a beehive from a swarm she captured in a hollow log, and soon golden jars of honey became the Homestead's signature product. The 3 bony cows multiplied into a small, healthy herd because Emma knew how to spot a good bull and barter for breeding rights. Silas discovered that the land he'd considered cursed actually held a natural spring that Emma unearthed by following the flight path of dragonflies. With clean water and rotational grazing, the pastures greened, and neighbors who'd once pitied him now came seeking his advice. They built a proper cheese house together, mortaring stones side by side, and Silas carved a sign that read, "McAllister Creamery, Frontier Quality." One night, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies, Emma confessed that she'd nearly torn up his advertisement because it seemed so cold and lifeless. She told him that she came expecting a transaction, but she stayed because she saw a good man buried under the wreckage, waiting to be resurrected. He took her hand, rough from work, and admitted that hiring a bride was the best foolish decision a broken man ever made in desperation. She gently reminded him that she hadn't married him yet, and he would need to ask properly with flowers and a bended knee. The next morning, he rode 10 miles to pick prairie roses and knelt in the muddy barn aisle while she was milking, proposing with a trembling voice. She set down the milk pail, laughing and crying at once, and said yes before pulling him to his feet and kissing him soundly. The justice of the peace married them under the cottonwood tree, the same one that had witnessed so much sorrow, now draped in wildflower garlands. Their wedding feast featured Emma's famous cheese, fresh bread, and the first honey harvested from the hives that symbolized their sweet new life. As Mrs. Emma McAllister, she continued to innovate, starting a small school for frontier children to learn arithmetic using butter churns and seed packets. She trained local women in cheese making, turning the homestead into a cooperative that lifted the entire settlement out of subsistence poverty. Silas often marveled at how a woman he hired merely to pull teats had transformed his shameful ruin into a beacon of hope across the plains. The County Gazette eventually ran a headline that proclaimed the McAllister spread as the jewel of the frontier, and orders for cheese poured in from distant towns. One winter, a blizzard trapped a family of travelers, and without hesitation, Emma turned the creamery into a warm shelter filled with nourishing soup. Silas realized that her heart was the true jewel, not the rebuilt buildings or the thriving herd, and he told her so every single night. They never forgot the stock advertisement that brought them together. Emma kept it folded in her Bible as a testament to improbable grace. When their first child was born, a daughter with auburn curls, they named her Providence because she was proof that even ruins could bloom. The once sagging barn now echoed with the laughter of children learning to churn butter, gather eggs, and recite poetry under Emma's patient tutelage. Silas built a schoolhouse on the edge of the property, funding it entirely with the profits from the honey and cheese Emma had pioneered. Every Sunday, the family gathered beneath the cottonwood tree to give thanks for the life that had sprouted from a desperate, practical contract. Emma often told her daughters that any woman can milk a cow, but it takes courage and kindness to heal the unseen wounds of a ruined man. The story spread far beyond the frontier, inspiring other lone ranchers to place advertisements seeking true partners instead of silent servants. Years later, a young journalist arrived to interview the famous couple and asked Emma what she saw that first day, but Silas could not see himself. She answered that she saw fertile soil under the weeds and a heart of gold beneath layers of sorrow, just waiting for someone to tend them. The journalist wrote that the McAllister homestead stood as a monument to the truth that the right person can turn any wilderness into a garden. Silas added that she hadn't just revived the land. She had revived his will to live, and that was worth more than all the honey and cheese combined. The creamery continued to thrive, eventually shipping products by rail, but they never lost the small batch care that made their reputation sterling. On their 20th anniversary, their daughter Providence gifted them a new sign, hand-painted, that read, "Jewel of the Frontier. Love restored everything." Emma stood back and wept, realizing that the legacy she'd built wasn't just a prosperous business, but a family rooted in intentional compassion. Silas wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered that every wheel of cheese and every jar of honey was a love letter she'd written to the world. They expanded the cooperative, helping dozens of other struggling homesteaders find their footing with small loans, shared equipment, and Emma's expert instruction. No one who visited the McAllister place ever left without a full belly and a spark of hope that their own hard luck could be similarly reversed. One evening, an elderly man who'd known Silas in his darkest drinking days came by and wept at the transformation, calling it the work of an angel. Emma simply smiled and said, "Angels don't exist, but hard work and stubborn love can do things that look an awful lot like miracles." When the original advertisement paper finally yellowed and crumbled, Silas carefully copied the words onto a fresh parchment to preserve the sacred memory. Providence grew up and attended a fine ladies' academy, but returned every summer to work the creamery because she valued honest labor above fancy parlors. She eventually took over the operations, and her parents retired to the small cabin they'd first shared, now enlarged into a comfortable cottage with a wraparound porch. Silas and Emma spent their twilight years rocking on that porch, watching grandchildren chase the same goats whose ancestors had started the whole enterprise. She often reflected that a ruined homestead was simply a canvas, and she thanked God for the blunt advertisement that gave her the brush and the courage to paint. He would chuckle and add that he'd hired a bride to milk cows, but he got a business partner, a teacher, a mother, and the love of a lifetime instead. The town eventually renamed the local creek McAllister Spring, honoring the water source that Emma discovered and freely shared with all her neighbors. When travelers asked the secret to the homestead's success, the answer was always the same: find someone who sees your ruins as potential and never let them go. Emma passed away first, gently, in her sleep, and the entire frontier mourned the woman who had turned barren soil into a paradise of abundance. Silas stood at her grave under the now enormous cottonwood tree and told the gathering that her last words were to keep making the cheese. He continued her work, though his hands were gnarled with age, because he knew that every wheel of cheese honored her irrepressible spirit. Before he died, he commissioned a stone monument beside the creamery door, inscribed with her name and the phrase, "She turned a ruined homestead into a jewel." The monument became a pilgrimage site for young couples starting out, who would touch the stone and pray for even a fraction of that transformative devotion. Their daughter, Providence, preserved the story in a leather-bound journal that the town library still holds under lock and key for special readings. Generations later, the McAllister brand remains synonymous with quality dairy, but even more so with the redemptive power of a woman's determined love. Students at the local school still learn arithmetic by calculating the butterfat content of milk, just as Emma taught, bridging the past and the future. The original milk pail, dented and worn, hangs above the hearth in the family's main house as a relic of that first crucial morning. Every autumn, the town holds a festival called Emma's Day, where cheese wheels are judged and the story of the hired bride is recited aloud. Young men afraid of commitment are told that if Silas McAllister could rise from the ashes, then anyone can with the right partner at their side. There is a saying carved into the old cheese house beam: "She came to milk cows, but she stayed to milk the potential from the land and the man." It serves as a reminder that the greatest investments are not made in gold, but in the hearts of those willing to heal what the world has broken. And so the ruined homestead became the jewel of the frontier, not through luck or fortune, but through the daily choice to care deeply and work faithfully. If you ever find yourself on that patch of Texas soil, you can still hear the laughter of children and the hum of bees woven into the breeze. So remember, dear listener, that a single advertisement, a brave answer, and unconditional love can turn the most desperate ruin into a shining legacy. Thank you for watching this story from Stories Hub Official. Please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below so we can bring you more frontier tales.